J.J.MCCULLOUGH joins me now, commentator and political cartoonist. We'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment. J.J., welcome.
Thank you.
Well, can you tell us about this publication in France that was attacked today by the terrorists? My understanding is, for all of the controversy and discussion, it really didn't have a large circulation.
No, it's part of sort of this kind of, I don't want to say underground, but definitely part of this kind of subculture that's quite common in Europe, of these kind of thin, printed on newsprint kind of magazines that are just sort of brimming with very sort of raunchy, kind of very silly, kind of absurd cartoons and sort of silly, sort of satirical articles that people like to pass around and read on the subway and are very much they sort of appeal to the kind of folks that like to think of themselves as counterculture or anti-establishment, which explains sort of the culture of the magazine itself, which, as many people have noted, is this kind of equal opportunity offender that really does sort of take pot shots at everyone equally. It's very much sort of a nihilistic kind of magazine, much more than it is a magazine with any identifiable sort of political bent one way or another. It's a magazine that pokes its nose at the establishment. I mean, it was founded in 1969. I mean, it's gone through a number of different incarnations, but it was very much founded during the de Gaulle administration. You know, Charles de Gaulle, you know, the great general who helped liberate France from World War II, and it very much framed itself as like a publication that was willing to take pot shots at this man who was often, you know, considered a great sort of reverential figure. I mean, they did a very famous cover that actually got them briefly banned by the French government when General de Gaulle died, and they sort of poked some fun at kind of what in their mind, sort of pointless event his death was. And so that's very much important to understand kind of the cultural milieu from which this magazine emerges and which they've continued to uphold for many years as different presidents and different political trends have come and gone.
Well, and not exclusively attacking Islam. In fact, the Catholics didn't like it very much.
No, not at all. Not at all. And that's the thing, right? I mean, it has been, as I said, a kind of nihilistic magazine that sort of looks at the world and sees you know, ridiculousness, stupidity, pomposity everywhere, and attacks everybody quite equally with equal savagery and equal humor. And the Catholic Church has been a routine subject of mockery. Certainly Pope Benedict was a subject of enormous scorn. I mean, they did a number of very vulgar cartoons about the pedophilia scandals that have rocked the Catholic Church. And they've done a number of really quite grotesque cartoons about Jesus Christ and God. I remember there was one where they did a cover where it's like, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and they're engaged in this like bizarre sexual three-way. So, I mean, they attack everyone with equal opportunity. The idea that this was in any way some sort of bigoted publication that was just seeking out Muslims to bash them is enormously ignorant about what this magazine's all about.
Yeah, in fact, I had been unaware, JJ, because I didn't know that much about the publication, that it also attacked Christianity. So I went online today to see what they had done in that regard, and certainly I found some things that I found offensive, but I'm intelligent enough to be able to understand that the beauty of being in a country where you would not be able to take action or arrest somebody for putting out such a cartoon against Jesus, so to speak, is that then I have the opportunity to say whatever I want about them. And if I have my wits about me, maybe I'll make the better point.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I mean, not everything that they publish is my cup of tea either, but I have always liked the magazine, and I've always found it to be quite inspiring because it is such a pure example of freedom of speech and such a pure example of sort of the liberated role of the satirist in a healthy democracy, which is that no one is sort of safe from criticism. You know, General de Gaulle wasn't safe from criticism when he was the great conquering hero. You know, Muslims aren't safe from criticism today, even in our ultra politically correct times. The idea was that this is a magazine that sort of doesn't take anything for granted, that doesn't do anybody's bidding, that just sort of sees the world as it is, which is often a world of sort of preening, pompous people that deserve to be taken down a peg. And I think it's, you know, again, like that is just a very positive and very encouraging sign of a very healthy press culture of a sort that I don't even think, frankly, you see in North America nearly as much as you see in Europe, where I do think that some of these sort of traditions of political correctness and not wanting to do things that could be possibly perceived as racist or anti-woman or homophobic or transphobic or ableist or any of the other sort of rainbow of offenses that we've created are much more prevalent and much more dominant in the cartoonist community.
Well, it was a vicious attack, and it took out a lot of people in a small publication. Does it have a future?
Well, I mean, they've survived in the past. I mean, this is definitely a pretty mortal blow, and we shouldn't underestimate the seriousness of losing, not only their editor, but several of their most famous and acclaimed cartoonists. I mean, the idea is that you'd like to think that this will be a moment in which, people will rise to take their place. I mean, the organization, it's worth remembering, was quite savagely firebombed in 2011. They lost so much. I mean, the organization was basically turned to rubble. They lost so much of their archives, they lost all their computers, they lost basically everything. And they were able to rebuild, and I think that we all have to be wishing the best that they'll be able to rebuild again.
Well, you are, in part, amongst the other things you do, a political cartoonist. We'll look at one of your cartoons, or maybe a few, and talk about the value of that art and the future of it coming up on Straight Talk. Satirical magazine attacked for the second time, and much more viciously this time in Paris. The previous attack, a firebombing. This one, a shooting of a number of the people who worked at the publication, including others around them. A security police officer for one of the people who worked for the magazine. Another police officer out on the street. A vicious terrorist attack in Paris that took place coldly, efficiently, brutally some hours ago in that city. J.J.MCCULLOUGH is with me. In addition to the commentary you see him do here on Sun News, he is a political cartoonist. And some years ago, when the Danish cartoons about Muhammad were of such controversy, JJ, the only publication, I think, in Canada that ran those cartoons so people could see what the fuss was about was the Western Standard, run by Ezra Levant. I understand you were contributing to that magazine at the time.
Yeah, I was a staff cartoonist at the time, and I did a number of special cartoons for them. It was when I was in university, actually. It was one of my first real print publication jobs.
All right, let's take a look at a cartoon. Did this cartoon that we're putting up on the screen run in fact, that same publication, that same day that the Danish cartoons ran?
Yes. So the Western Standard did a special issue that featured those Muhammad cartoons that were run in the Danish newspapers and caused so much trouble. And then I did a special cartoon as well, because I feel like, it's one thing to merely reprint controversial cartoons that someone else has drawn. It's another thing entirely to actually add more fuel to the fire, so to speak, so to draw your own cartoon. So I did my own cartoon, which you see there, which features a Muslim drawing, or features a Danish guy drawing a picture of Muhammad, which is, of course, taboo unto itself. But then the point that I'm trying to make is, of course, that in the Muslim world, they have no problem drawing all sorts of very vicious anti-Semitic cartoons, and they don't seem to care a whit about what sort of the Jews think of this kind of thing. So it was just an attempt to sort of expose the hypocrisy of, I felt, the Muslim world getting so indignant about cartoons when they, practice it as good as anyone else. I mean, the thing is that very few people actually got to see this cartoon because, of course, none of the stores in Canada would stock this particular issue of the magazine. Chapters and various drugstores and all the normal places where you'd go to buy a magazine all sort of were sufficiently intimidated to not publish it. Although it's kind of, or not to sell it rather, I should say. Although it's kind of funny now. At the time, I had a lot of anxiety about drawing that cartoon and definitely getting it published. And now when I look at it today, I just feel like, oh, it's very innocuous. I don't really care much about it one way or another. I do think that, I would hope at least that, certainly up until this very moment, I would think that cartoonists kind of got over their initial fear of that kind of thing and were a little bit more empowered. But I mean, I suppose we'll see if this attack and its sheer brutality has much more of a chilling effect in the long term.
What value is there to society of the political cartoon?
I think the thing is that political cartoons show that at the end of the day that nothing is kind of sacred in a way. That we are ultimately a society that realizes that, anyone is fair game for criticism, that you can really reduce anybody down to a caricature, you can make anybody look ridiculous, you can find the humor and the fun in just about anything. And that's very much, as I said earlier, what Charlie Hebdo was very much good at doing, is just sort of portraying like everyone from, the president of the republic to some, idiot on the street as equally deserving of scorn and satire. And just kind of making people realize that as much as we see headlines that are very disturbing and very depressing, that in some ways the world is fundamentally a very silly place full of a lot of people that take themselves far too seriously, and that sometimes it can be a really good sort of source of comfort in difficult times to just kind of take a step back and kind of laugh and just sort of say, like, my God, the world is kind of insane.
Yeah, I think in more normal times, when you do a good political cartoon on a politician, for instance, it sort of punctures the balloon, which can often be a good thing. Salman Rushdie, JJ, weighed in today. Now, this is a guy who's had a death threat against him for quite some time from radical Islam, and he said, in part, respect for religion has become a code phrase meaning fear of religion. Religions, like all other ideas, deserve criticism, satire, and yes, our fearless disrespect. Now, I don't think respect for religion has to mean fear of religion. I'm living a different life than he is, and so maybe that's where he's coming from. I can respect the religion and the people in it, even though I might not agree with it, would never be an adherent of that religion. Although, on the other side, I think he's right that anything should be up for some form of ridicule, even the things that I might hold most dear.
Yes, and I mean, it's important that we be very clear about phrasing the issue at stake in this kind of way, because a lot of people have been saying, oh, it's it's an issue of freedom of speech and yada 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 in these kind of very broad, grandiose kind of terms, and that's true to an extent. But what really is at stake here is the specific exercise of freedom of speech to attack sort of minority groups, to attack people who are believe that they should be protected from criticism, which is to say, in this case, Muslims in particular. Do we, as a society, believe that Muslims are as deserving of criticism as everybody else, or are we going to live in a society in which there are two different standards? It's not about criticizing religion, it's not about criticizing politicians, it's about this very particular community that is asking to be judged by a different standard. And we're, as Westerners, as people that are heirs to a great tradition of freedom of speech, as heirs to a great tradition of equal opportunity offense, are we going to be cowed by this basically new community, new definitely in our political context, coming in and sort of demanding that we change the rules to appease them? And I think Salman Rushdie is exactly right when he says, no, we shouldn't.
The leader of the opposition federally here in Canada, Thomas Mulcair, had a comment today about freedom of speech. Let's take a look.
With regard to freedom of expression, it's freedom of expression. And that's why it's one of our fundamental reasons. That's why we've got to stand up for it and hold ourselves in solidarity with those who practice a trade where not everyone's always going to agree with what we say. That being said, I think it's also very important that we always show a great deal of respect for each other and for our religious practices, because freedom of religion includes respect for other people's religions.
You think around the country, for those people who have the good fortune to be political cartoonists, JJ, it's really not a huge population. Editors will be saying, you could find a different topic to do your cartoon for tomorrow's paper.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel this already. I mean, I work still part-time as a political cartoonist, and some of my editors are very sensitive about this kind of thing, about not wanting to cause offense, not causing a backlash. I mean, it's getting very striking, though, to realize how, because in North America, I think that these kind of cults of political correctness are much stronger than they are in Europe. I mean, I actually did a cartoon recently where it's like, okay, well, what can we criticize? We can't criticize the Muslims because they'll bomb us. We can't criticize the North Koreans because they'll, attack us as well. You can't criticize President Obama too hard because then you're racist. You can't criticize feminists because then you hate women. So it's like, what's left? And I do think that, cartoonists have to be a little bit more gutsy, a little bit more willing to just put themselves out there and take the blows that they get and sort of take a cue from the Charlie Hebdo experience and just sort of be an equal opportunity offender and sort of take the blows that come from that, so to speak, because that's ultimately what this tradition is about. This is what this art form is about. And if it's not about that, then you may as well fold up and go home, because nobody wants to be a cartoonist that's just drawing in this tiny little box of narrowly acceptable, politically correct things. That's not what I got into it for.
Yeah, well, I'm a straight white Christian male, so you could make a cartoon making fun of me. You'll be on safe ground there. Thanks very much, JJ.